Hello. In this particular lesson today, coming to you from lovely Bloomington, Indiana, in the rolling hills here, is on Cognitive Information Processing, or CIP, SIP. Just get a sip of this and you'll be fine. So maybe you don't pay attention to this whole talk. It's one of the longer talks of the 8 that I'm doing here in September 2008. And actually is the last one that I'm doing of the 8. It's not the 8th one in the program, however. I saved maybe what you might think the best for last, maybe the worst for last. You'll have to decide. Anyhow, I'm excited about SIP. I need more than a SIP, but hopefully you'll get a few things to use in your classrooms or your instruction or whatever that you find valuable. And we'll see if that's the case at the end here today. This is a huge area. I mean, we're talking about cognitive psychology, which has decades and decades of research. In fact, started in the 1800s, if not well before that, but became perhaps the discipline in the 1960s and 70s and became the mind's new science, or the cognitive revolution, as some books pointed out in the late 70s, early 80s. So there we are today, using this information from the cognitive revolution in our own instruction, and so will you. So let's take a look here. So what is it that's important? Well, we've changed from observable behavior as being the most important thing to mental processes being important, right? We've changed from a focus on looking at shaping of behaviors, and with the growth of the industry in computers, we can in turn see that the mind processes information similar to a computer. And we could experiment on computers and have it approximate some of the things that maybe humans do and study that. We can study intelligence, we can study thought, memory, short-term as well as long-term memory. We can study how we process and store and retrieve information and make it available. Sensory register, sensory memory is of unlimited quantity, unlimited stores for a fleeting moment of time. We can hold information for a short period of time in our brains, and it's gone. We have to attend to it. We have our memory that we have to attend to, and in order to see whether or not we do in fact process that information and move it in, encode it into long-term memory, make it available. If we don't attend to it, if we don't put it in working memory for at least a little bit, we'll lose sight of it and won't pay attention to it, and it's not typically there later on when we go to try and retrieve that information. So that's our cognitive information processing model, moving from sensory register to working memory to long-term memory. And we have metacognitive processes that oversee the process, that oversee what's going on here to help us internalize. So sensory register we have for that fleeting moment of time that we encode, record information that we see in our environment and pay attention to it. Now, short-term memory is memory that's 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. Having information that's chunked in a small but usable quantity that is available to us upon demand. So short-term memory is our workbench. In effect, I've got my workbench in front of me. If I can lower my camera here for a second, you can see my little workbench. I might put my bottle of water here on my workbench. I might grab my glass case on my workbench. I might grab this little bag on my workbench, and maybe my little new flip Mino on my workbench, and my schedule and my keys are on my workbench. But I can only attend to so many things on my bench at one point in time, just like memory works. Okay? We can only attend to things for a fleeting moment of time. And so we constantly are shifting what we're looking at. For a while I might look at this bag and this gift card I got, I haven't opened yet, and a little something inside here as well. Looks kind of interesting and not in my language. So anyhow, I might attend to my calendar for a brief moment of time. There's lots of stuff in this calendar for me to attend to. So we can only attend to things for a brief moment of time on our workbench. Our working memory stores. if we chunk things together, we might be able to remember more than if we didn't chunk it together. So we take things from sensory register, focus on things in working memory, but only a small amount of information, 7 plus or 2 minus 2 items in our working memory. And short-term or working memory, what happens to information while it is in working memory determines whether we'll remember it. If we rehearse it, if we practice it, if we link it, if we chain it, we might remember it. 3 possible outcomes: it's gone, it's purged. Number 2, it's kept in working memory, it's repeated. And number 3, it's transferred to long-term. Experiment number 1. Let's look at numbers on a screen, and when blank, attempt to recall them. After a few seconds, I will move to the next slide, and we will repeat this activity over and over and over again. Okay? Well, are we ready? Okay, recall that number. Write it down on a sheet of paper. Recall that number. Recall that number. Frustrated yet? It's a lot of numbers to try and remember. Again, it makes the point. I mean, I didn't give you this is a normal psychological experiment with the set time in which you normally would get, but you get the sense that things become more difficult as you have more information presented to you. It becomes harder and harder to recall everything that's there, right? Look at it, you've got nothing in your brain now. Nothing at all. Oops, there it is. Okay, how many digits did you recall? What was going on there? What explains your recall? What, were you rehearsing? Well, you didn't have time to rehearse. Were you elaborating? Probably no time. Familiar with things? Could you chunk things? In one study, they got someone to expand his working memory from the normal 7 plus or minus 2 digits to 120 digits. What was he doing? He was taking his track times and encoding things according to his best and worst track times, whether it was his half mile, 2 mile, or whatever. He was chunking information together as he got it presented, and he'd remember it that way. And then he could recall things according to a set of numbers in succession that were thrown at him 1 digit at a time. And over time, he started remembering more and more and more of those digits that were presented. Chunking is an important concept to keep in mind in learning. Could you chunk 2, 4, 9, 25, 20 together somehow? Certainly. That's why phone numbers become 7 digits long typically. Well, in the UK and Europe, we have to remember 10 digits. They're a little smarter in the UK than we are. But, we still can get 7 digits, no problem. Increasing processing. Well, we can try to repeat ourselves over and over and over again. And the more we try our math facts, repeat the times tables, repeat the spelling of a word, writing on the board, play a musical instrument. The more times we do that, the more automatic that becomes. So we learn things through automaticity. How is working memory different from long-term memory? Well, long-term memory is not conscious. It has greater capacity. It's our RAM of information. So I've got my flash memory sticks, and on these flash memory sticks, I can hold 16 gigabytes on one and 32 gigabytes on the other, and soon a terabyte of information. When we get to a terabytes of information in our pocket, that's going to be an amazing time, by the way. But still, imagining 32 gigabytes sitting in my hand, compared to what was available in the 1980s and 90s, this is amazing for $100 or whatever it costs, right? Our brains are amazing things too, because we can put massive amounts of information in there that may never be lost. I mean, there's stories now of women like Jill Price who remember everything they've done in their life, every event since they were 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. Their brain grew in a certain part of their head to enable her to do that, and she could recall things from specific dates that you throw at her. Amazing stuff. Our brains are wired to remember most everything that happens to us if we organize it well, if we rehearse it, if we elaborate on it. So there are qualifiers to that statement. Yes, we can learn most anything, but we have to efficiently learn it. And how do we efficiently learn? Through rehearsal and elaboration. Rehearsal being more behaviorally based, elaboration being more cognitively based. Through making it available and accessible. Through recognition and recall. You know, it's not the only thing to have information available, but to have it accessible. You know, it could be there somewhere available, but it's the accessibility. It's that tip of the fingertip knowledge, the tip of the tongue knowledge. You know, I know this, but I can't get it right now. I can't, it's there. I just can't get it out of my mouth. It's in my head, and so I'm trying really hard to get at that. So, you know, it's in my earlobe somewhere. It's hanging down. I just got to stick my finger in my ear and get it out. Okay, yeah, right. So retrieval cues become important. And storage. How are we storing things? How are we chunking? How are we organizing the knowledge structures that we have and interlinking them together? It becomes critical. You know, recall versus, you know, we've got recall issues and recognition. Yeah, we can recognize something if it's there in a matching exam, but filling the blank's a bit harder. I'd rather have recognition tests than recall tests. Declarative knowledge versus procedural. Declarative is just the facts checked, just the information. Procedural is how to do something. So anyone can say the facts and the times tables and so forth. Declarative knowledge can be broken down to episodic stories and semantic verbal information. So we can have narrative stories and we can also have verbal information. So we can have declarative, facts, and we can have procedures, how to do something. Now, some people would rather focus on facts. Some people would rather focus on how to do something, the procedural knowledge that we have. Episodic memory for an automobile accident that we're in 13 years ago. We might remember the events. Semantic memory for Columbus landing in the New World in 1492. That relates to semantic memory. So episodic is stories we can recall. I can remember when we were hit in the back of the car when I was young. My father driving a station wagon, the whole back seat hit. My brothers were in the back seat. The glass popped out the opposite way. Fortunately, it didn't land on them. They could have been really hurt badly, and they weren't. We got pretty lucky when a drunk driver hit us coming late at night. So, you know, being in bad accidents, I can remember stories. I wasn't around when Columbus landed in America, but I've been listening to books lately, 1491 and other books of history in America, and I can recall facts based on my semantic knowledge. More long-term memory information. What's your earliest memory? Can you remember, like Jill Price, back to almost, actually, she can get some stories when she's 8 years old, the full day. We're talking about the full day, not just little incidents. She can go back to really, really early age, learning age 2, 3, 4, and so can many people. Some people can remember way early knowledge. I can remember about age 4, I think. It's about the earliest memories that I've got. How do we store information? We store things declaratively, procedurally, conditionally. That's one model. We store things as facts, procedures, and then applications of those, or metacognitive knowledge. Do we store it as episodes or semantic memory, memory of like a dictionary kind of memory, thesaurus in our head, or as narrative stories? Do we store things as icons or verbal words? Do we, what are the ways in which we store things? Comprehension models, do we store things bottom up or top down? Do we remember the facts and then work up, or do we remember the big picture and work down? Many ways to think about memory. Encoding memory. Using memory tricks to remember information, or lists or names of information, or names of people. What tricks do you have? I mean, I use the peg word method to remember groceries, or I sometimes I tie a string, or I write on my hands little memory ways to remember information. Long-term memory, meaningfulness of information, organization of information. The most important thing, potentially, that you can learn from this class, and that all your students will benefit from, is that it's the organization of information that's key. Organization of information that's critical. That's where we all gain by organizing and reorganizing the information, making relationships among and between pieces of knowledge. That's where learning is powerful, and that's where we all can learn, in effect, right? We all have a chance to learn. So it's organizational structures, self-questioning within that, once you build those structures, and maybe at high level and low level questions that you might ask of text. So procedural is how to do something, declarative is the facts and definitions and rules, and condition is how to do something. Conditional knowledge is how and when to apply that knowledge. So we've got declarative knowledge, factual knowledge, schema, images in our head, linear orderings of information, declarative information. John Bransford in 2000 and others published, well, he did this earlier in 1979, he originally published the tetrahedral model of learning. It's learning the content and the tasks that you learn those within, and the teaching and learning activities, and the characteristics of the learner that interact. So what books are you assigning? What tasks are you assigning within those books? What characteristics do the learners come in with for learning? What are the critical tasks that we want people all to learn? So it's the materials, it's the learner prior knowledge and expectations and attitudes. It's the tasks, the problem-solving tasks, the recall tasks, the transfer tasks, and the activities, attention, elaboration, rehearsal, and so forth, that determine learning. It's a combination of things. If I was to say to you, I want you to remember all the items in this list. Now, some of you might pause this at this point in time, but maybe don't pause it for too long. Just spend 30 seconds looking at the list. Okay, so if you do pause and want me to shut up, that would be a way to do this. If you don't want me to be paused, I will try and close my mouth for a brief moment and spin my chair. Okay, time's up. Now I want you to write down as many of the words as you can remember. And I'll spin my chair the other way because I'm getting a headache going the one way. Okay, how many of those words did you remember? You remember beggar, deer, movie, Coca-Cola, napkin, photo, friend, wishing well, Lake Lemon, which is here in Bloomington, you need to come and check it out, ant, Mexico, stadium, tree stump. Say that again 3 times. Tree stump. Conference, potato, Honda, memory, civilization. Okay, how many of you got 3 words? 5, 10, 15? What did you do to remember those words? What might you have done is to create a story, an acronym, a keyword, whatever. There are many ways to remember information. You can create shortened words or acronyms for the starters of each word, creating first letter mnemonics that might stand for a sequence of words. IBM is International Business Machine. Holmes is the 5 Great Lakes. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. Acrostics, every good boy does fine, or every good boy deserves a favor. The scales, the musical scales, E, G, B, D, F. Keyword, pato means duck. Well, in Spanish, pato means duck, so you might think of a duck with a pot on his head, the pot being the key word. You have this image of a duck with a pot on its head, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, pato means duck. Rained means frog. You think of a frog being rained upon. The peg word method. 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 3 is tree, 4 is door, 5 is hive, and so forth. Well, I'll come back to that. Method of both sides, story method. There are many mnemonic methods that you can use. First letter mnemonic is probably the most widely used. This reflects the popularity of mnemonics rather than its wide use as a strategy. There are two types of first letter mnemonics. Acronyms, in which the initial letters form a meaningful word, such as in face for the notes of the spaces of the treble staff, or acrostics, in which the initial letters are used as the initial letters of other words in which to make a meaningful phrase, such as every good boy deserves fruit for the notes of the lines on the treble staff, E, G, B, D, F. Okay? Every word, the first letter of that word, stands for something else. In this case, that's scale. First letter mnemonics are very effective in recalling the order of well-learned items. First letter mnemonics, such as queuing strategy, remind us of what we already learned, as they are therefore particularly effective for overcoming mental blocks. Okay? When your mind goes blank, when you're cramming for an exam, the last thing you might want to do is create these mnemonic techniques right before going to take the exam. Every good boy does fine. The notes represented by the lines on the treble clef, bottom to top. Elephants got big dirty feet, E, G, B, D, F. Every good boy deserves fudge. Elvis's guitar broke down Friday. Empty garbage before Dad flips. Every good burger deserves fries. E, G, B, D, F. All of those. Just different ways to learn them. 9 planets. Well, I guess there's only 8 planets now, but let's go when there were 9 planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and that little Pluto planet that's really an Altoid, a satelloid. It's nothing. It's just a piece of rock out there somewhere, or a gaseous something. But we'll assume it was a planet. Men very easily make drugs serving useful nocturnal purposes. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Now, I guess we could delete Pluto and say men very easily make drugs serving useful, I don't know, nighttime medicine. I don't know. Okay, 9 planets, first letter mnemonic. My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. I guess just served us some NyQuil. There you go. My very educated mother just served us NyQuil. And then we don't have Pluto on the end. The old Arab carried a heavy sack of hay. This is a first letter mnemonic for trigonometry. The tan equals the opposite divided by the adjacent. The cosine, the tangent equals opposite divided by the adjacent. The cosine equals the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. And the sine equals the opposite divided by hypotenuse. TOACAHSOH. So we've got the old Arab carried a heavy sack of hay for remembering these trigonometries. TOHCAHSOH. We also might remember the famous Indian chief, the Native American chief, Sakatoa. SOHCAHTOA. Never shred wheat, never eat shredded wheat. For remembering the directions of a map, place the first letter of each word in a clockwise circle starting with the 12 o'clock position, north, west, east, and south. Never eat, well, I guess this should be N, E, S, and W. I've got a typo there. Never eat slimy worms. Never eat soggy waffles. Never eat sour watermelon. Never eat shredded wheat. Because elephants can always understand small elephants. Spells the word because. Big elephants can always understand small elephants. Spells the word because. Necessary. Not every cat eats sardines. Some are really yummy. Necessary. Necessary. This, to me, because and necessary seem a little bit more than what I would do in remembering a word. Peg word method. Uses numbers instead of places. These numbers are transformed into visual images by means of the following simple rhyme. 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 3 is door, it's tree, 4 is door, 5 is hive, 6 is sticks, 7 is heaven, 8 is gate, 9 is line, 10 is hen. Now you might use different words for your pegs, But if I had to remember toilet paper, ketchup, beer, and potatoes. So let's say I have to remember toilet paper. I might think of stuffing toilet paper. Let's start with ketchup. I might think of ketchup on a hot dog bun. Then I might stick toilet paper in my shoes to make my feet not feel so loose in them. I might have potatoes growing from a tree. And what was the fourth thing I was going to remember? Oh well, I've already forgotten it because I didn't make a peg word out of it. I should have done that more quickly. How about gum? I go to the door and there's gum all over the door. How about I have to remember, something else? So I can basically walk through. What else you want me to remember? Water. Let's think of a beehive getting water on it. Okay. So I walk through these. One is bun. Okay. Ketchup. 2 is shoe. Okay. Toilet paper or Kleenex or something. 3 is tree. I might think of potatoes hanging from the tree. 4 is door. Gum on the door. 5 is hive. The water going on the hive. So but the problem with the peg word method is they work only one time. When you use it again, you think of new items. So bit of a problem there. Peg word, the rhyme must be learned over and over by rote until it's learned. Accordingly, there is a higher cost to the peg word method than than the place method, which I'll come to in a little bit, where cues already are overlearned. Peg word, most effective for short-term strategies. Difficult to use if information is presented too fast, and difficult to use effectively without extensive training. I don't think it needs a whole lot of training. To be honest, I'm a little bit of disagreement of that one negative, but I like the peg word method. I think it's a wonderful method. It saved my life on many occasions, and I didn't end up on the streets, my wife kicking me out of the house at the end, although maybe she's tried. Okay, link method. Uses visual images to link ideas together. However, instead of linking items to well-learned structures, items are linked to each other. So, when I was a kid, I would love to go fishing with my father. And we go on a boat early morning, we go off and have a great time fishing all day. My brother might come or whatever. But now when I got to remember something, I think of that boat. I think of the boat situations, and we're throwing stuff in the boat. I got my keys to remember, I throw them in the boat. I got my watch to remember, I throw them in the boat, in my imaginary boat. I got my flip mino to remember, I throw that in the boat. Okay? I got my second pair of glasses for whatever, my sunglasses maybe, throw it in the boat. Got my whistle, get those fish to jump in the boat, I got that in the boat. So I have this image in my head, always thinking about how to get others to be part of that boat situation. So I'm always thinking about how to store things, how to retrieve things in my brain, structure things, get those items in the list. If I got to remember apples, bread, beans, and bananas, I might try and link them together into that boat scene. Or I might try and link them together by thinking them in a shopping cart. Okay, I got bread, and I don't want to put the apples on top of the bread. That would squish them. So I put the apples on the side. The bananas I don't want to squish. So put them on the other side. And the beans I just throw in. I don't really care about beans. I might have them interacting in some ways. I might imagining an apple orchard, the beans next to them, and maybe, I'm chewing on some bread and peeling off some bananas under the apple orchard or something. I might think of a scene and try and link them all together. So the verbal method might help us link words together like vegetable and instrument and college and nail, fence, basin, merchant, queen, scale, goat. Let's say I gave you those words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words. Is that right? So you got 10 words to remember. Create a story now. I'll flip around my chair. Maybe you hit the pause button. That might have been better than watching me go dizzy. And this is affecting my brain. Whew. Okay. For example, a vegetable can be a useful instrument for a college student. A carrot can be a nail for your fence or basin. But a merchant of a queen would scale that fence and feed the carrot to the goat. So creating a little story or a little sentence structure there to remember that. Story or link method. These are difficult to use if the information is coming at you really fast like I just did, and you do need some training. It's a bit more complex without going through the order. You have to really do the story a number of times to get it. Now, one story method was created in ancient Greece when Simonides left a dinner party and the building had collapsed and everybody's head was chopped off and he couldn't really figure out whose body was whom, where people were at the dinner table. He used the method of loci, or method of location, to try and match the heads back up with the bodies by knowing who was sitting in different places of the table where he had been. They were able to do that, okay? Now, people have used this method of loci back in Greek times and in Roman times to remember speeches. They would place different parts of the speeches in different parts of rooms that were familiar to them, and as they gave a speech, they would imagine themselves walking through the room and delivering that speech. So, according to Cicero, Simonides invented it. The legend has it Simonides escaped a disaster that destroyed a building where he was having a dinner with dignitaries. He was able to recall the names of victims by recalling where they had been seated. First of all, with this method of loci, you've got to choose a place that you're familiar with. Your familiar route home from work, your house, a room, something that has landmarks that you can remember. And you must train yourself to walk through that room, a route through that room, relatively easily walking through that room. Thus, to remember a shopping list, you imagine each item and in turn at these particular landmarks. You might have a loaf of bread sticking out of the letterbox. You might have a giant apple in place of the door. You might, as you walk through a door, you might see an apple. And as you enter a new hallway, you might see a bunch of beans. As you enter the bathroom, you can see a chunk of bananas. So that way, when you know you're going to the grocery store, you're imaging the bread, the apples, the beans, and the banana by walking yourself through your house, if you will. Now that assumes your hurricane hasn't hit your house, like what's happening in the Carolinas and Florida and Mississippi and Texas lately, and your house still exists. The method of loci uses cues that you already know. It's probably the easiest, according to some people, way to imagine. I don't find this one as easy as the peg word method or the first letter mnemonics, but okay. It's difficult to recall a particular item without going through the list in the order in which you have placed them. So if you're looking for an item in the list that's later on, you got to walk yourself all the way through to get to that point. Most effective for relatively short-term strategies, by using landmarks again and again, you can only readily recall the last list. Earlier lists are much less easy to recall. Okay, so once you create a list, it's there, and once you create another list, the old one's gone. It's difficult again for information presented fast. Okay, more mnemonics. Musical periods, composers, and keywords. Let's say we're trying to use the keyword mnemonic. And we know that Mozart's from the classical period. You might have someone mowing art in a classroom. Mozart, classical period. Ha, 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 ha. Ellington, Duke Ellington, jazz. Well, you might think of an elephant with jars of clay or something. Or a jazzy elephant, Duke Ellington, jazz. Geography mnemonics. We have different geological time periods. Cambrian and Ordovician and Silurian and Devonian and Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, Paleocene. I'm not even going to try the rest of them. And so you have these different time periods and geological times. Well, it's difficult to remember those. How about cows often sit carefully? Perhaps their joints creak. Persistent early oiling might prevent painful rheumatism. Almost got it. Okay. So you've got the letters, and you can get the ordering of the time periods. Now, cows, well, Cambrian. Often. Ordovician. Sit, Silurian. Down, Devonian. You can tell I didn't major in geology, so we'll move on to beyond the rock people to biology. Not another one of my fortes. Order of taxonomy in biology: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kids prefer cheese over fried green spinach. Order of colors in the rainbow or visual spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Richard of York gave battle in vain. R-O-Y-G-B-I-V. That sounds pretty similar, and that would be an easy one to learn and an easy one to apply. Now I know Richard of York gave battle in vain. Richard, red, of, orange, York, yellow, gave, green, battle, blue, indigo, in, vain, violet. I got it. Okay. Da-da-da. Oh, be a fine girl and give me a kiss now, sweetie. Oh, be a fine girl and give me a kiss right now. Smack. For remembering the spectral classes of colors from hottest to coldest. Okay. I'd rather get a kiss, but we'll remember things better this way. Declarative, procedural, conditional. Let's move on to procedural. Okay, so hopefully those mnemonics, before we go on to the next section, hopefully those mnemonics are helpful for you. Hopefully you can use first letter mnemonic. Hopefully you can find ways in which you can remember bits and pieces of information better through the mnemonics, through the aids that you're given. Now I'll remember things better because I have a first letter mnemonic to learn this information. I have the peg word mnemonic, or I have the keyword mnemonic, or I have the method of loci. All these are useful tools in which for you to remember information, right? Okay, procedural knowledge. How do you change a tire? How do you write an essay? How do you access the internet? We use procedural knowledge all the time. I'm now adjusting my chair. Procedural knowledge. I'm now drinking. I wish it was a beer. I'm drinking a bottle of water. Okay? I'm now checking my watch to see how much time. This one's going to be a little longer lecture than the norm. Okay? I think I have enough time. Finding information, searching information, knowing when and how to apply declarative and procedural knowledge is metacognition. So we might have the knowledge, we might have information that we need, but knowing when to call it up, when to bring it to bear on a problem is metacognitive knowledge. Episodic knowledge is storing things through your stories of your life, your personal biology, or your personal biography, I should say. I spent my summers in cabins in northern Wisconsin with my grandparents and parents. I must be at an 8:30 meeting tomorrow. I met a boring person in the business school today. Those are all stories, okay? I want you to think about your own stories of your life. I'm going to give you 20 words. I want you to write down the number of syllables if it's an A word, and I want you to think about stories in your life, pleasant or unpleasant, and write down a P if it's a pleasant word, a U if it's unpleasant, if it's in the B word. So A words, you get syllables. B words, write down pleasant or unpleasant, P or U. P-U. Okay? Let's look at these A and B words. A, again, number of syllables. B, pleasant or unpleasant. Ready, set, stop. Get that pen out first. Okay? A words were syllables. B word, pleasant or unpleasant. Ready? Blanket is B, pleasant or unpleasant. Just write down pleasant or unpleasant. Don't write down the word. Sun is A. Number of syllables. Write down the syllables. Typewriter is B. P or U. Jello is B. Coffee is A. Number of syllables. Banana is B. Window is A. Umbrella is B. Television is B. Elephant is A. Thermometer is B. Boat is A. Hardware is A. Wallet is A. Yellow is B. Clock is B. Picture is A. Basketball is A. Mailbox is B. Stereo is A. Whoop. Back up a second. Now, turn your page over and recall the words that you can. And I'll turn in circles as you do that. Now, I'll be quiet for a second. Pause this. At this part of the program, in your learning experience in this class, you should hit the pause button. And when you pause, you should recall the items from that list. Okay, you should have unpaused this now that you recalled your list, and here's the items from the list. A words were sun, coffee, window, elephant, boat, hardware, wallet, picture, basketball, and stereo. B words, blanket, typewriter, jello, banana, umbrella, television, thermometer, yellow, clock, and mailbox. Now some of you will naturally recall sun, blanket, stereo, and mailbox, the starter words, the first words used, and the last words used, right? We tend to recall the first and last items in a list. Okay, not too surprising, by the way. So, what does that tell us about teaching? We should emphasize what happens first and last, right? What's going on at the beginning of your class and the end should have the key nuggets of information. We also know from this list that you probably remembered more B words than A words. If you look at your list there, do you recall, how many of you recall more A words than B words? If you do, you're verbal learners. If you recall more B words than A words, then you're more affective learners. You're more normal people. A people are abnormal. Normally, people remember more B words because there's emotion and affect tied into things. Now, how many of you remembered more than 15 of the list? 16? 17? Not many of my students get more. So there's a notion of just recalling things and then tying in affect to the recall. Syllables are kind of a mindless activity. You might chunk ideas together. Primacy and recency, remember the first and last. You might have created a story for all the ideas, an episode. Flashbulb memories are when we all of a sudden remember everything that happened to us at a particular point in time. Maybe it's the smell that comes at us, someone's perfume that we smell, or the fresh cut grass that we smell that brings back a memory, a flashbulb moment in life. There's considerable evidence that flashbulb memories are often invented or elaborated, that they're really not truly flashbulb memories. They result from overconfidence rather than extremely recall of clarity and detail. Episodic memories often are both semantic and episodic in nature. If I was to ask you, what did you have for lunch yesterday? Think about that for a moment. What was it that you had for lunch yesterday? Did you even have a lunch? For me, it was Chinese with one of my new colleagues, Ray. Ray and I went off and had Mark Pye's China Gate. Great lunch, great place to go. Come to Bloomington to visit me. Okay. And have some lunch at Mark Pye's with me. All right? Get a happy family. Be a happy family. Well, if I asked you what you had for lunch 2 days ago, it becomes even harder. If I asked what you liked for lunch in elementary school, it's a different question. You might give me a generality. You might not give me the specifics. Comprehension models emerged from observation of younger and older adults in memory and from comparisons of students at different levels of expertise. We found that some people recall exact information. They are data-driven. They surface models. They recall the basic facts. Others recall the gist and look for the big picture and work downward from the gist. We call this looking down from a node. We have the hierarchy, we have the big picture, and then we look down at it to recall other pieces of information. Dual coding theory looks at the way in which we learn information both visually and verbally. We learn both words and images. Alan Pavio's research in Canada, in London, Ontario, at Western Ontario University, got at dual coding. We learn things both visually and verbally. The more we learn it in two ways, the better we will learn the information. In 1972, he came out with his dual coding theory, which assumed that if we process things in these two interconnected systems, this visual system and this verbal system, that if we do that, we tend to remember our information better than if we only recall it visually or verbally, that we have two tracks in our brains from which to grab it and pull it out and bring it to bear on a problem. Okay? That's the notion of that theory of dual coding-ness. Okay? And that's where mnemonics come into play, because with the mnemonic image, we can move beyond a semantic memory and have a visual that we can call and bring to bear on a problem. So we can have information in our sensory register. We can move from receptive knowledge to short-term memory into long-term memory, remembering things both verbally and visually, okay? And have an executive control or metacognitive monitor over the top of all that. So words and pictures, through our eyes and ears, we remember better than learning words only or pictures only. Learning only sound or images, we learn better by having both sound and image, because we have a verbal track and a pictorial track from which to grab and use in prior knowledge. Animations and narration. If we have a flash animation in this sequence coming out at you, and now we got picture in picture, you've got me presenting this talk, and you've got the slides. Well, you got two visuals, but you have an auditory track. You can hear me explain as well as see the slides. This relates to dual coding theory. You've got your ears, the animation, Dr. Bonk jumping up and down, and hip-hop and all this kind of stuff going on. Okay, whatever I might happen to do to make things more engaging, I might throw things at you or whatever I do. And you've got my verbal track, and you've got the slides. In fact, you've got almost 3 ways to learn here. So we've got a verbal system, language, words, sentences, and a visual system, a picture of somebody, an image of someone. Now, cognitive theory of multimedia from Richard Mayer says that, each working memory store has limited capacity. So humans are limited by this bottleneck of working memory. Working in groups or working with media, having technology support, can extend that working memory bottleneck, can extend what it is that we can do. Humans have separate systems for representing verbal and nonverbal information. Meaningful learning occurs when a learner selects relevant information in each store and organizes it and makes connections. And media should be designed to minimize cognitive load, not overload you with too much information, but to minimize it. Okay? And that's, we shouldn't have too many animations flashing across our screens as I present. So we select our verbal and visual images to attend to. We then organize and integrate them. Multimedia can help us focus on what to select, how to organize, and how to integrate that information together. Now, Mayer and his colleague Moreno, Richard Mayer's at UC Santa Barbara and has a book on multimedia for learning. He came up with 7 principles of animation within multimedia. The first being the multimedia principle. Presenting animation and narration together is better than just one or the other. That's the multimedia principle. The spatial contiguity principle relates to presenting text and corresponding animation closely related together rather than far apart. The temporal contiguity principle means that as opposed to the spatial space, but in time, presenting the corresponding information close in time, not just close in space. The coherence principle means getting rid of extraneous stuff that breaks down the coherence. So words, sounds, and video that aren't important, get rid of them. Extraneous stuff, toss. Multimedia principle, present animation and narration rather than animation and on-screen text. Okay, so we have both animation and narration rather than just animation and on-screen text. So we get at multiple ways of learning. Redundancy, if you have too many ways, it's not as good as just a couple of ways. Presenting animation and narration is better than animation, narration, and on-screen text. Personalization, a conversation with someone is better than formalized words. So the more personal, the better. Animation research indicates that animations do grab attention. They can emphasize important information and help make relationships clear. Okay, let's look at attention, forgetting, retrieval, recall, attention, encoding, forgetting, retrieval, and prototypes. That will be the last part of this lesson. Free recall means we have no cues. Cue recall means we have a hint, we have a start for a recall. So if I give you a list of words and I give you the first word, I give you a starter word, that'd be a cued recall. A free recall is when no cues are given to start remembering. Recognition is when you see the information there to pick from. Learners are given the pre-generated stimulus, and normally you'll have more chance of being correct than if it's a recall task as opposed to a recognition task. Encoding, it's best to have retrieval cues match the way the information was encoded originally. So you want to have things being made available for the learners, the room environment to be the same. You don't want to have someone banging on bells and whistles and parading around and having the room be too hot or too cold or too narrow or too wide or, you know, too spacious. You don't want to have people learn in a regular classroom and give them a test in a giant lecture hall or in a gymnasium of all places, which often happens. The cues at retrieval, matching the cues at encoding is very, very, very important. Encoding specificity, the state-dependent learning when instructional situations differ from the testing situations. Mood might differ, lighting might differ, the environment might differ, you might be on drugs. You know, when you're in a different state, you come not really prepared. You're drowsy. When I took my qualifying exam in statistics and flunked it, my grandfather had died. I'd been up all night studying. I did an all-nighter. I was not ready to take that examination. Okay? When I took my ACT, I had sprained my ankle the day before. I came in with the flu. I was feeling terrible. I took the ACT, basically flunked it. Okay? So don't feel bad if you did bad on it. I did really bad. Forgetting. Failure to encode information could be the reason you forget. You never learned it, or the cues that are presented don't match the way you encoded the information. You failed to retrieve because you couldn't access it, you couldn't retrieve it, or it wasn't stored richly enough. Okay? There are many reasons why we seem to think we forgot something. Again, it could be state dependent. We could be on drugs, we could lack sleep, we could be in an elated mood, or we could be in a depressed mood. Interference. We might have proactive interference or retroactive interference. Proactive means what we learned in the morning impacts negatively on what we learn in the afternoon. So learning Spanish in the morning might impact negatively on learning Latin in the afternoon. Retrospective interference means going back to interfere. So what we learn later interferes with what we learned earlier. Okay? There's two different types of ways to think about interference. So we might be in happy land learning from Dr. Bonk's learning theory class in the morning, and then in the afternoon we're taking a social psych class and we're learning something totally different about experimental design or whatever, and maybe interfering then with the concepts we're learning in social psych interfere with our educational psychology class. Okay? Going back, retrospective interference. Network models of learning. Network models of learning relate to how we learn information through interrelationships, interconnections among our network structures. Instead of concepts, we actually store propositions. We store things like the fact that birds have wings, that birds can fly. And we basically, when we say, does a bird have wings? We're looking down from the node, okay, birds, yes, they have wings. Do birds fly? Yes, birds fly. Do birds drink alcohol? Well, probably not on a regular basis, so they're not in that network structure, if you will, okay? Parallel Distributed Processing Model, or PDP model, assumes that we have more than one cognitive operation in parallel, that we're constantly processing information. Connectionist models try to describe cognition in terms of a behavioral level of what's going on in the neurons in our brains. PDP models. We have association between nodes. Connections between nodes help us recall information. The more richly those nodes are interconnected and stored, the more likely we'll recall information. Cognitive processing. We've already gone through attention, rehearsal, encoding, forgetting, but we didn't talk about perception all that much, and we'll now maybe get at some perception information, perception or pattern recognition information. There are many models or many ideas that relate to how it is in fact that we perceive things in our environment. Do we perceive things as sort of a mini template, if you will, or some kind of pattern, or a prototype? Do we have a prototype for what a bell is and what a bell should look like? Do we have a prototype for what a mouse should look like? Not a squeaky, squeaky mouse, but not Mickey Mouse, but a mouse for a computer. Okay. Again, my flip Mino. Okay, cool stuff. Okay, we have prototypes out there. Or do we look for features? Do we look for a particular feature in my flip Mino to know it's a flip Mino? Well, a flip Mino is going to have a flip. There we can upload it automatically to my computer. It flips out. So that's a flip Mino. It's going to have a little camera on it. Okay? And then it's going to have a power button on the side. And that's pretty much it. And that's a flip Mino. I have my little packet that I put the flip Mino in, and now I know I've got my flip Mino. So it has particular features in it. Color, maybe, like a black flip Mino. Well, we perceive things in our environment that, and how we perceive things in our environment determines our later learning and our attentional processes. You know, we control what it is that we attend to, meaning that the task or information holds for particular information is important. The similarity of that information with other piece of information is very important, and how complex it is. So really, what meaning are we're placing on something? Do we use template matching? Do we have a basic template for what a sheet of paper should look like, or what a course syllabus should look like, or what a bottle of unopened water should look like? We have, a template or structure, a mental copy stored in our brain. Or do we have a prototypical structure? Fire engines are red, okay? Dogs have 4 legs. Chairs, like this one I'm sitting in, have 4 legs on them, okay? And this one has, you can see, it has 5 legs. Oops, it's not a prototypical chair. Now, am I all messed up? Am I going to die tomorrow because I have a 5-legged chair that I'm sitting on? Well, in fact, many chairs have 5 legs in them. Okay, so maybe it's not so different. Okay, so how are we storing things? Right? There are some 3-legged chairs. Even looks like a 1-legged chair for you. So how are you storing that information in your brain? How can we know? Are these chairs? Well, how do we know they're chairs? Well, they look like something that you can sit on. Feel fairly comfortable, like that red one I'd fall asleep in, right? What about 3-legged dogs? What happens when you see a 3-legged dog? Is that still a dog? Do you have to accommodate that, or can you assimilate it in, as Piaget said, to an existing notion of dogness? And what is a dog, or what is a cat? Feature analysis. What features are you going to focus in on? What distinctive features are there in what it is that you're looking at? Okay? What is the basics that you're looking at there? For a cat, we might look for the eyes that you can see in the dark, or the ears that lay over the top of a windowsill, right? For a bunny, well, the bunnies might not be that big in real life, so that might not fit our feature of what a bunny rabbit looks like, but features that we're looking for. Okay, this new generation X is said to attend to things faster, more multifaceted than previous generations. Can we really rewire our brains in such a short amount of time as a generation or two? From being serial processors to being multitaskers? That's a question that I want you to think about in here. Are we going to need to change our psychological models of learning based on this new generation Y and X or millennial student? Do we really have a change going on here today? Are kids really preferring multimedia and nonlinear learning? Are they really expecting to co-design their learning experiences? Are they really going to want you to teach them using rich multimedia and activities and synthesizing across them? Is this the wave of the future or the wave of today? It's a question for you to ask yourself. Okay, let's end with 8 applied cognitive theory recommendations for you. First of all, provide organized information. Make the structure and relations of materials evident to learners, such as concept maps and graphic organizers. If you do that, if you organize information, as I said in one of the other lectures, Ausubel talked about advanced organizers, all right? If you organize information, people will learn it better. There's no doubt about it, okay? And so create those organizational aids. These do take time, and they are one reason why you might want to teach the same class over and over again so as to create better materials. So structure the materials. Even better, co-structure it with the students. Have them help you create the structures. Recognize the limits of short-term memory. Don't have long lectures like this one too often. This is one of 2 of mine that were a little longer in nature, or maybe this is the only one that's more than 45 minutes, I think. So, of the 8, I tried making them shorter in nature. In fact, most people say 20 minutes. Okay, I could have done 16 20-minute lectures instead of 8 45-minute lectures, all right? So recognize the limits and help learners focus their attention on important pieces of information so that they can in turn study that information better. If you do that, if you help focus them, they can overcome those bottlenecks. If you get them in small teams and groups, if you help them to synthesize, to identify important information. There's studies out there that shows that the more knowledgeable students are, the more metacognitive skills they have, they're able to pick out the main ideas. If you rate things of importance at level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 being the most important, the more metacognitively aware students can recognize the high-level knowledge and focus in on that knowledge. Number 3, provide organized information. Well, we kind of already mentioned that with number 1. Let's go back to number 1. That was provide organized instruction. Now we're saying provide organized instruction. So I guess I'm repeating myself. Why? Because it's so important to do. Okay, number 4, recognize limitations of short-term memory. Chunking. I guess, again, I'm repeating myself again. Why repeat myself? Because it's so important. Here's an issue. Chunking information, elaborating on information, helping them out. Number 5, matching encoding strategies with the material to be learned. Okay, we want people to process things deeply and meaningfully. So we want to have encoding strategies to be relevant to that information. Don't just rely on mnemonics. You don't want to just rely on gimmicks. You don't want to rely on rote learning. You want to rely on things that, or have your students anyhow, rely on things that are relevant and meaningful and engaging for them. Okay? You want to have your students really making things relevant for their own learning, to get them in depth, to get them understanding, and utilizing strategies that really fit them well. Remember the lesson about the LASI, the Learning and Study Skills Inventory? Everybody's got a different set of learning skills to learn information and store it. Provide opportunities for both verbal and imaginal encoding. Don't just give, pictures, don't just give text, but when you combine them together, and in the case of this lecture, we've got audio, we've got visuals, you've got multiple tracks in which to learn. You might have an iPod Nano. In the back of many of these Jerry Garcia ties, there's a little slot that's placed in the iPod Nano place your iPod Nano in the tie, and then you can constantly be learning. Well, you want multiple ways in which people can learn, multiple tracks, if you will, for people to learn, just like the iPods provide. Arrange for a variety of practice opportunities to have people try things out in a real-world setting, if possible, in a quasi-real-world setting, in a classroom setting, to apply this in their jobs, maybe to have you observe things in your jobs and write cases, like in your midterm assignment in here, to write mini cases or personalized learning theories, and to see how relevant the concepts from this class are to real life. When I teach undergraduates, I have them do a field experience. In that field experience in schools or businesses, I have them reflect in a journal, preferably a blog or a discussion group, on the concepts that they're learning for that week and relating those concepts then to the book. And so I try and create that linkage so that students see that the concepts are relevant that we're learning in this class. They can see that things that we're learning might be different in the real world, or that their experience might not be the same as others. So while they might have a bad field experience, others might have good ones, and not to give up on teaching. But I'm constantly trying to link the field, their job, to the textbook. And that's a key role, I think, of a teacher, right? And that's what this concept says, is that provide practice in multiple places where we can see it, try it out, reflect on it, debrief on it. Those are two things I haven't talked much about, is reflection and debriefing. Many of my colleagues are much better than me at reflection and debriefing. I'm trying to get that way, and I think they're powerful learning mechanisms, and that's something you need to consider. Finally, number 8, help people become self-regulated in their learning. Provide examples of summarizing, provide examples of questioning, provide examples of clarifying ideas. You know, we really need to get students to understand themselves as learners, reflect on themselves as expert learners, and really to understand what strategies to bring to bear on a problem that might be effective for them, that might not work for other people. So there are many implications of cognitive psychology, of applied cognitive psychology for a classroom, for a business, for daily life. That, I mean, really, in many ways, these theories, and cognitive theory in particular, is one that is a daily life endeavor. I mean, each minute of the day, we should be using cognitive strategies in some way. We should be thinking about the working memory constraints that we have on us, so that, you know, when things are announced, they don't get in the way, or they don't interfere with our processing, our commitment, our persistence in pursuing a problem. We don't get overloaded with too many things on our cart that we have to try and attend to and keep in mind. That we've got our storage, we've got our memory structures, whether it's on our terabyte of data that we're storing in our heads, okay, or whether it truly is our wetware inside, not just our software on the side. So what are we doing to help learners learn? What are we doing to help them become successful, passionate, engaged learners? Each of us should be a passionate learner in our own field. Each of us should be thinking about ourselves as a successful, confident learner who's always on the move to learn more. We do have short-term memory bottlenecks. We do have information glut in our society. There are ways in which we all can learn, and we all can learn better. I want to thank each of you for coming to these various lecture talks that I've been given here at Indiana University over the past 8 weeks. I hope all of you have had a chance to learn more from them. I think that in each case we've had a chance to explore social constructivist theories, behavioral theories, cognitive theories, and other things. And this is one lecture, one theory of many that you'll be learning in this class. Hopefully you'll put all 8 of these particular lectures together and make sense of learning theories, make sense of yourself as a learner, and hopefully your philosophy of learning, your philosophy of what it means to be a learner, will shift a bit, will change a bit, will, in effect, be better suited for the learners that you're dealing with, as well as yourself as a learner. And you yourself will find that you'll be more empowered, you'll be looking at yourself more lifelong as a learner, and your goals will expand, your successes will multiply, your motivation will increase for learning, and that will often move on to other people who see you as a passionate and engaged learner and will want to become one themselves. So think across all the learning theories we're covering here. Think across your own life and how you've changed as a learner, or maybe how you've changed as a teacher over your lifespan or over the time you've been teaching. We've probably always been teaching as brothers or sisters. But also think about within the realm of this class how you're changing as both a learner and a teacher. And if in just a small, minute way we have learned and changed something about ourselves as a learner or a teacher, then I think Driscoll's been successful, and I've been part of that change. And so hopefully this is one important class that you've had in the realm of many, but continue to come back to this class and think about yourself from a cognitive standpoint, from a behavioral, social constructivist, problem-based learning, situated learning, social cognitive theory, all these things and how they intermesh, and even the Gagne's instructional design. So with that, I thank you for coming to this talk, as well as to coming to all 8 respective talks that I'm giving in this lecture series here at Indiana University, September 2008. My name is Kurt Bonk, coming to you live. Thank you again for coming to these sessions. CJ Bonk at indiana.edu. Again, thank you, and good luck to you in your own learning journeys. Send questions. Bye. Peace.